In 1945, Europe lay in ruins. Cities were reduced to rubble, economies shattered, and millions faced hunger and homelessness. The continent had endured 2 world wars in just 3 decades, leaving its nations militarily exhausted and politically unstable. Across the Atlantic, the United States emerged as the preeminent global power with unmatched industrial capacity, a vast military, and economic strength. While Europe struggled to recover, the Soviet Union expanded its influence across Eastern Europe, turning Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and the Baltic states into communist satellite states. The United States recognized that a weak Europe would be unable to resist Soviet expansion, potentially reshaping the global balance of power. In response, Washington introduced the Marshall Plan in 1947, sending billions in aid to rebuild European economies. Beyond economic recovery, it reinforced the notion that American support was essential for European survival. The plan worked. Factories reopened, infrastructure was rebuilt, and public confidence returned. Yet the reliance on American aid highlighted a deeper reality. Europe could not defend itself alone. Militarily weakened, politically fragile, and economically dependent, the continent's security became intertwined with American power. This dependence formalized in 1949 with the creation of NATO. For the first time in history, a collective defense alliance placed the United States at the center of European security. Article 5, declaring that an attack on one member is an attack on all, ensured that American military might would protect Europe from external threats. European nations contributed forces and funding, but the decisive deterrent remained American. U.S. troops stationed in Germany, Italy, and the United Kingdom symbolized both protection and dependence. European leaders understood that without the American shield, their nations would face existential threats from a powerful neighbor to the east. Dependence extended beyond troops and tanks. Nuclear weapons, advanced aircraft, and strategic intelligence, all controlled by the United States, became the ultimate guarantee of European survival. Countries like France, Britain, and West Germany were unable to develop such capabilities independently. European policymakers recognized that American commitment was indispensable for stability, security, and the preservation of liberal democratic systems. After decades of devastation, relying on America was not just a policy choice, it was a practical necessity. Even culturally and psychologically, the reliance was evident. Memories of occupation, destruction, and loss during the world wars shaped European leaders' thinking. The notion of self-sufficiency was overshadowed by the need for a reliable ally capable of projecting power, deterring aggression, and maintaining peace. American bases, troops, and strategic planning became embedded in Europe's security framework. Political decisions, defense strategies, and even national budgets were influenced by the presence of the U.S. guarantee. The Cold War had not yet begun, but the foundation for decades of transatlantic dependence was already laid. European nations could rebuild economies and restore political order, but they could not, on their own, defend against external threats of the scale posed by the Soviet Union. In every practical sense, Europe's security was inseparable from American power. The alliance was born out of necessity, sustained by strategy and reinforced by shared interests. It was clear from the outset that while Europe could recover with American aid, true security, protection from invasion, coercion, and nuclear threat was only possible under the American umbrella. This reality shaped the next half-century of European strategy. Dependence on America was not a matter of choice or pride. It was a pragmatic response to history, geography, and the imbalance of power. The continent had learned that survival required more than rebuilding cities or economies. It required the backing of a global superpower willing and able to guarantee its safety. Europe's reliance on the United States was complete, absolute, and foundational, setting the stage for decades of strategic alignment, military cooperation, and political partnership that continues to define the Transatlantic Alliance. During the Cold War, Europe's dependence on America became unavoidable. Between 1949 and 1991, the continent faced a constant and powerful Soviet threat. NATO was more than a treaty. It was Europe's lifeline. Western European nations were recovering economically, but lacked the military capacity to defend themselves independently. The United States provided nuclear deterrence, advanced conventional forces, and strategic planning, creating a shield that European armies could not match on their own. U.S. bases across Germany, Italy, and the United Kingdom were not just symbols of alliance. They were the front line of European defense. European militaries contributed troops, but American technology and logistics were decisive. Britain relied on U.S. nuclear weapons to deter the Soviets. France sought American support even while asserting partial independence, and West Germany rebuilt its army only under American guidance and oversight. The disparity was clear. European countries could organize, train, and plan, but they could not match the scale, speed, or reach of American military power. Without it, deterrence would be ineffective and national security threatened. Crises repeatedly demonstrated this imbalance. In 1961, when tensions escalated over the Berlin Wall, it was U.S. nuclear and conventional forces that prevented Soviet action. European capitals understood that their safety depended on American decision-making and readiness. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 reinforced the same lesson. European security was inseparable from U.S. strategy. Even when France temporarily withdrew from NATO's integrated command, it remained dependent on American nuclear deterrence and logistical support. Independence in policy did not translate into military self-sufficiency. The dependence was structural as well as practical. Europe's fragmented military capabilities meant that no single country could project power across borders or defend against a large-scale invasion. NATO standardized weapons, communication, and training under U.S. leadership, ensuring cohesion and interoperability. European forces became effective only when integrated into a system anchored by American command, technology, and strategic oversight. The imbalance was never just numerical. It was technological, operational, and strategic. Economics reinforced this reliance. Post-war European growth depended on the security provided by America. Without the U.S. umbrella, European nations would have had to divert massive resources to defense, slowing recovery and jeopardizing prosperity. The Marshall Plan had shown that economic stability and security were inseparable. NATO institutionalized the same principle. Europe could prosper under American protection, but attempting to achieve both economic growth and military independence simultaneously was unrealistic. Psychology played a critical role. Memories of Nazi occupation and the devastation of two world wars made European leaders cautious and pragmatic. They knew that even well-trained armies could not resist the Soviet Union without American support. Dependence became ingrained in policy, defense planning, and public perception. European leaders accepted that survival required more than diplomacy or national defense. It required a partner capable of decisive intervention. Even as Europe modernized militarily during the 1970s and 1980s, the reliance persisted. Advanced weapons, intelligence networks, and strategic planning remained dominated by the United States. European nations improved capabilities, but they remained insufficient to counter the scale of Soviet power alone. NATO's deterrence worked not because of European strength, but because American power backed it. The Cold War confirmed a fundamental truth. Europe could rebuild economies, govern democratically, and maintain social order, but security at the level of existential threats required American military supremacy. This reality shaped decades of policy, alliance management, and strategic thinking. European nations contributed to collective defense, but the ultimate guarantee of safety rested with the United States. Dependence was not a sign of weakness. It was a pragmatic acknowledgement of geography, history, and the balance of power. European leaders understood that while diplomacy and cooperation mattered, the presence of a global superpower willing to intervene was the true cornerstone of security. The Cold War ensured that Europe's reliance on America was institutionalized, enduring, and strategically essential. When the Cold War ended in 1991, many expected Europe to achieve strategic independence. The Soviet threat had disappeared, Berlin was reunited, and European integration accelerated. Yet new challenges quickly revealed that Europe remained reliant on American power. The conflicts in the Balkans during the 1990s exposed this reality. Yugoslavia disintegrated violently, and European nations struggled to respond effectively. NATO, under American leadership, intervened with precision, conducting air operations to halt ethnic cleansing in Bosnia and later in Kosovo. European forces alone lacked the logistical capacity, intelligence, and air power to act decisively, demonstrating that American involvement remained indispensable even in a post-Cold War world. The rise of global terrorism further highlighted dependence. After the attacks on September 11, 2001, European security became intertwined with American counterterrorism operations. U.S. intelligence networks, drone capabilities, and rapid deployment forces played critical roles in preventing attacks and dismantling extremist networks. European nations benefited from American technology, planning, and global reach, allowing them to secure their own territories and participate in overseas missions they could not have managed independently. Russia's resurgence under Vladimir Putin reinforced the ongoing reliance. The 2008 war in Georgia and the annexation of Crimea in 2014 showed Europe's limited ability to counter Russian military assertiveness without American support. European nations watched from behind their borders as Russia projected power regionally, recognizing that the presence of U.S. forces and American deterrence was the key factor preventing wider conflict. The 2022 invasion of Ukraine underscored the same reality. European security strategies relied heavily on American intelligence, advanced weaponry, and logistical assistance, while Europe's own military capacity remained constrained in comparison. Dependence also extends into technology and cyber capabilities. Advanced satellite surveillance, missile defense systems, and intelligence networks are predominantly American-controlled, yet essential for European threat detection and response. Many nations rely on U.S. platforms for early warning and strategic planning. Without access to these systems, Europe would face critical vulnerabilities in both conventional and asymmetric threats, demonstrating that reliance is as technological as it is military. Economic factors continue to shape this relationship. Defense spending in Europe is limited by domestic priorities and public opinion. Building forces capable of fully independent defense would require massive budgetary reallocations, political consensus, and public support, conditions rarely achievable. In contrast, American guarantees allow Europe to focus resources on economic growth, infrastructure, and social programs, while maintaining a credible defense posture. Security comes without the full financial burden, reinforcing the transatlantic dependency. Even politically, European leaders recognize the limits of their autonomy. Strategic decisions often require consultation with Washington, whether addressing NATO commitments, responding to Russian provocations, or planning coalition interventions abroad. Military independence exists in theory, but is constrained by operational realities. Europe can coordinate and plan, but decisive action depends on American support, leadership, and capability. The post-Cold War era has demonstrated that Europe's dependence on America is not a relic of history. It is ongoing, practical, and multifaceted. From nuclear deterrence to intelligence sharing, rapid deployment, and crisis response, American power remains the foundation of European security. Even decades of integration, modernization, and ambition have not replaced the need for U.S. involvement. History, geography, and capability gaps ensure that Europe cannot secure itself fully without the United States. The lesson is clear. Europe may manage regional stability and address smaller threats independently, but existential security relies on a superpower willing and able to project force. Dependence has evolved, encompassing terrorism, cyber threats, and modern geopolitical crises, but it has never disappeared. European nations operate in partnership with America not out of preference, but necessity. Strategic autonomy remains a goal, yet the practical reality is that U.S. power anchors Europe's security in a world where today Europe faces a complex and unpredictable security landscape. Russia remains aggressive, instability persists in the Middle East, cyber threats are growing, and global tensions in Asia have strategic implications for the continent. Despite decades of military modernization and European integration, the continent continues to rely on the United States for decisive security. NATO remains the backbone of this protection, not as a relic of the Cold War, but as an active alliance ensuring Europe's survival in an increasingly volatile world. Calls for European strategic autonomy have grown, particularly from countries like France and Germany. Initiatives such as the EU's Permanent Structured Cooperation aim to improve coordination, readiness, and capability within Europe. However, these efforts face inherent limitations. European forces remain smaller, less technologically advanced, and less globally deployable than those of the United States. America maintains the unmatched capacity to project power rapidly, deter aggression, and respond to crises, making full European independence unattainable in the near term. Recent events have reinforced this reality. The Russian invasion of Ukraine exposed Europe's continued reliance on American intelligence, advanced weapons, and logistical support. European nations contribute troops and resources, but decisive deterrence relies on the U.S. without question. Advanced systems, from missile defense to cyber networks, remain predominantly American, and access to these capabilities is critical for Europe's operational effectiveness. Even the most ambitious European military initiatives are most effective when integrated with U.S. capabilities, demonstrating that partnership is essential for security, not optional. Economic considerations further entrench dependence. Maintaining forces capable of independent, high-intensity defense would require drastic increases in defense spending, which is politically difficult and socially unpopular across Europe. By relying on the American security guarantee, European nations can preserve economic stability, invest in growth, and maintain public support while still contributing meaningfully to collective defense. Pragmatism dictates reliance over independence because the cost and risk of self-sufficiency are too high. Dependence is also deeply ingrained in strategic culture. European policymakers and publics understand that security cannot be taken for granted. Geography, history, and past conflicts have left a clear lesson. When existential threats arise, American involvement is decisive. This reliance is not a weakness. It is the product of realism. Europe leverages the U.S. shield to maintain sovereignty, protect populations, and uphold democratic systems without overextending national resources. Even as Europe continues to modernize and strengthen its militaries, the core reality remains unchanged. American nuclear deterrence, rapid deployment forces, intelligence superiority, and logistical support are irreplaceable. European efforts to enhance strategic autonomy complement but do not replace American power. The Transatlantic alliance remains central to preventing aggression, managing crises, and sustaining global stability. Europe's security is a function of both partnership and dependence, rooted in practical necessity rather than ideology. Looking ahead, Europe may gradually increase its operational capabilities, reduce certain dependencies, and take a more proactive role in regional security. Yet full independence is unlikely. Structural, technological, and economic factors ensure that U.S. power remains the decisive factor in European security. Dependence is no longer just historical, it is contemporary and ongoing. The alliance endures because it balances capability with necessity, allowing Europe to survive, thrive, and focus on prosperity while relying on America to guarantee survival against major threats. Ultimately, Europe's reliance on America is the result of centuries of conflict, geography, and strategic reality. American power provides the security foundation that enables European stability, growth, and autonomy in all other areas of society. The transatlantic partnership continues not because Europe cannot act at all, but because it cannot achieve decisive security alone. American support remains the indispensable pillar of European defense, ensuring that the continent can navigate modern threats, global instability, and future crises without facing existential danger. Dependence is pragmatic, enduring, and essential.